Hello, this is Tracy Yates, and this is another exciting episode of Reality Check Radio. And in this episode, we are going to tackle the very fascinating topic, at least fascinating to me, I hope to you too, of immortality. Number one is immortality, as in somebody born into a physical body that walks the earth. Is it real? Is it real? Are there people from ages ago that are still alive and walk the earth? Okay, so that's the first thing that we're going to examine here. And with that in mind, we probably are all familiar with the movie Highlander. Okay. And and obviously there can be only one. The main saying, the main, quote from the movie Highlander. And these guys are immortals that are born anywhere from hundreds to thousands of years ago that walk the earth. So, is there anything to that? That's what we're going to address first in this episode of Reality Check Radio. And in the first episode of Highlander, for anybody that's watched it, um, there's an epic battle scene at the very end. So, spoiler alert, in case you haven't watched it, shut this video off now and go watch it because here it goes. There's an epic battle scene at the end of Highlander. And during this battle scene, he faces the bigger, stronger guy on the right here. But he was fortunate enough to be taught a lot of technique by a character played by Sean Connery, who came into his life a few hundred years ago. And that technique allowed him to overcome this giant on the right here and to cut his head off. Okay. And that's the point I was getting at. Um, he was able to cut his head off and hence ending his life. And so that's a question. I mean, we know, I know, and a lot of you guys that follow me know that the elites hide the truth in plain sight through Hollywood movies, through films, magazine covers, and commercials, and so forth. And could this be another example of the truth hidden in plain sight? That this character, the bad guy in Highlander, and all the immortals in Highlander for that matter, are only able to be killed by chopping their heads off. That would seem a little far-fetched, I mean, like reaching for something, that probably isn't true or correct. If there wasn't other things to consider here. And the one thing that I want you guys to consider is the fact that a lot of people ask the question about how do you kill a Nephilim giant? You know, and a lot of people think there's two ways to do this, either by placing them in an indefinite state of stasis where they are neutralized indefinitely, possibly, which would be what the flood would do, the flood of Noah. You know, they breathe in the water, they sink to the bottom of the sea, they drown in their physical bodies, even though they may, in their immortal bodies, be in a state of hibernation, whatever, you know. I mean, it's just a theory, but placing them in an indefinite state of stasis, which is also what people that work in deep underground military bases, especially under Antarctica, claim. Whistleblowers that come forward, they claim that these giants are still alive and in a state of stasis where they are coordinated off in their own special rooms with signs warning you not to get too close to that room, because even though they're in a state of neutrality physically, where they don't move, like you could call it a state of hibernation, their minds are still active, and they have such powerful minds and such a powerful um, connection, psychic connection, I guess you could say, that they can literally take over people's minds, cause them to go crazy, and kill them in a lot of cases, just because said person got too close to their chamber where they're being held in stasis. This may sound like a bunch of woo-woo, but this has actually been verified by countless people that have came forward, that have worked for Black Ops projects, for deep underground military bases, and so on and so forth. So it seems to be plausible, at least, that these giants were put in a state of stasis through the flood and through, being frozen under Antarctica. And, but we're not talking about, placing them in a state of hibernation or a state of stasis. We're talking about killing them, as in Highlander, and is Highlander possibly the truth hidden in plain sight that I've shared with you in other videos? Why they do this, why the elite do this? Because it's required. They're under a contract. They hold seances once a year in places like Bohemian Grove, where they summon up spirits so they can get advanced technology and knowledge of the future. And these spirits are fallen angels. Fallen angels, angelos, messenger in the Greek means messenger. And they're created to be messengers, and they can't help being a messenger, whether they like it or not. But the contract with the elite that they have is, if they give the elite this information, the elite must also pass on this information. And the last thing the elite want is for you and I to know this information. So they pass it on through TV shows, magazine covers, commercials. It's called the truth hidden in plain sight. I'm sure you've all heard of this saying. Okay, that's what it is. That's where it came from. And so they pass on, they fulfill their contract by passing on the information, but they hide it within the movies. Hence the truth hidden in plain sight. Hence the chopping off of the heads in Highlander to kill the immortals, which represent Nephilim. Nephilim. Okay, so is this realistic? Um, Before we go further on this, I want you guys to consider this verse. First Samuel 17:50 through 53. David defeated Goliath with a sling and a rock. Okay, this probably isn't the I don't know CV. I pulled this up quickly, but I don't know the CV translation. So I'm going to pull up another translation for you guys real quick here because I can tell just by reading that that's not accurate. And King James Version seems to be one of the most accurate versions. So I'm going to pull that up for you guys right here. So it says David prevailed over the Philistine Goliath with the sling and with the stone, and smote the Philistine and slew him, but there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine and took his sword and drew it out of the sheath thereof and slew him. So this is where it gets a little bit confusing because it says in the verse 50 here that he had a sling and a stone and he smote the Philistine and slew him. But what he actually did with the stone, if you read the rest of this passage, is knocked him out. Okay. He knocked him out with the stone between the eyes. And we can verify this when we go to verse 51. Therefore, David ran and stood upon the Philistine and took his sword, Goliath's sword, and drew it out of the sheath thereof and slew him and cut off his head therewith. And this is when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead and they fled, according to this. So he actually killed him by cutting off his head. And that's what I wanted to share. That other translation, I don't even know, I'm not familiar with it. It didn't make this clear, but if you read in the King James Version, it makes it clear that he actually killed him with the sword by cutting off his head. And a lot of people think that's necessary. And that's the truth that's being shown in plain sight in the movie Highlander when they have to get their heads cut off in order to die. That's the only way to actually kill these guys. Okay, so um, I find that very interesting that David had to actually go up to Goliath with his Goliath's own sword here, which you can see looks amazingly big, a little too big for David. It's almost as long as he is tall to cut his head off to kill him. I mean, that wouldn't be necessary if he was already dead by the stone. Okay, so it's logical to assume the stone knocked Goliath out, and David had to run up there as fast as he could and use Goliath's own sword to cut off his head to kill him. And you know, cutting off a giant's head, I mean, it's probably a lot easier just to stab him through the heart or pull up his armor at least, because it's probably more like chainmail and stab him through the heart or underneath the armpit. To cut off the head is probably the hardest way to do it. So if you're doing it that way, there's probably a reason behind it, just my opinion. So anyway, David ran up there, cut off the head of Goliath, and that's how he killed him. So it would seem to indicate that possibly the Nephilim were immortal in a sense, and the only way to kill them was to cut off their heads. And this isn't unconditional immortality. This is there's different names. There's like unconditional immortality, which basically probably only applies to Jesus and God. Okay. And then there is conditional immortality, which isn't true immortality. What it means is that you will live on unless somebody kills you by a certain method that has to be used to do that. And this is a biblical fact. Okay. It's not. conjecture. This is actually a biblical fact. So, what do I mean? Well, before I even get into that, there are people now using modern day technology that are striving for immortality, believe it or not. And they think that they can reach this immortality through this well, let me just read this article. It's Will Humans Ever Be Immortal? And if you are human, you're going to die. This isn't the most comforting thought, but death is the inevitable um, price we pay for being alive. Humans are, however, getting better at pushing back our expiration date as our medicines and technologies advance. If the human lifespan continues to stretch, could we one day become immortal? The answer depends on what you think it means to be immortal or to be an immortal human. And basically, the gist of this is that they're studying this jellyfish type thing that's called a hydra. And it seems to be, quoting them here, remarkable. It seems to have a remarkable approach to aging. And these things are largely made of stem cells that constantly divide to make new cells as their older cells are discarded, excuse me. The constant influx of new cells allows Hydra to rejuvenate themselves and stay forever young. And if you study more into Hydra, it gets a lot deeper than just that. They actually have done their best to kill these things, like grind them up in a blender, and then the different cells will start attaching themselves to the other cells, and they still live. They've sent them to outer space for, I forget how long a periods of time, a long time, and they came back alive. I mean, they're finding out that these things seemingly are impossible to kill. And with that in mind, they're using this kind of technology to try to graft it in to human cells with programs like oh, come on, I'm spacing it right now. But anyway, that programs that can um, can graft in different information in the human DNA, and they're now trying to use these cells to graft in this information and possibly give humans a chance at immortality, which not possibly. Actually, they will succeed. As amazing as this sounds, they will succeed at doing this. And this is why, if we go to the book of Revelations, it tells us that in Revelations 9:6, it says, "And in those days shall men seek death and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death will flee from them." Revelations 9:6, King James Version. And that's basically, in my opinion, it's modern day technology that they've thought was a good thing. They thought it was a good thing. So they actually, experimented with it. It worked. They started, using this on whoever could afford it, probably. And then you have all these people, countless people running around with cells in their body that regenerate faster actually than they can die off. So basically, unless you cut their heads off, it would be impossible to kill them. So they basically um made themselves a form of a modern day Nephilim, and instead of being a blessing like they all thought it would be, these people go through the tribulation, which is really, really bad. And including, super volcanoes going off like uh, Yosemite or Yellowstone, and things happening around the world, global cataclysmic events happening around the world that make it so that in some places it's so hot that you can't even go outside without frying your skin. In other places, you can't even breathe. You feel like you're panicking because you can't get any good oxygen. So these people that, at first thought that immortality was a good thing are now thinking it's not so good, and they wish they could die to get out of this living hell, and they can't. And that's what Revelations is saying. So, just, food for thought, for those of you that maybe have inquisitive minds like I do. And just as an addition to all this, there was a supposed incident that was reported by Steve Quell and several others that said that our elite special forces had an encounter with a giant a few years back. I don't remember what, 2002, I guess it was. And this they were supposedly these special forces were roaming the mountains of Afghanistan searching for these rebels that hide in the cave systems of Afghanistan. And while they were doing this, they encountered a 13-foot giant that ran out of a cave with a giant spear and skewered one of them. And then they all hell broke loose. They opened fire. I don't remember if any others died, but I remember that they got out of there and they didn't kill the giant. Okay. And it was supposedly, like I said, a 13-foot tall creature, as reported here, the story of the giant from Kandahar. And it was supposedly 13 foot tall. U.S. Special Forces are said to have seen it in 2002. The giant was said to have a fiery red hair, six fingers on each hand, and two rows of teeth, which coincidentally is exactly what the Bible says Nephilim have: red hair, two rows of teeth, and six fingers and six toes. So are they just going to say that? No, they're not. They're not going to verify the Bible. These people, the last thing they want to do is verify God's word. So if they're saying that, then I'm going to assume that that's true. And what they're actually doing inadvertently without knowing it is verifying a Nephilim giant. So anyway, what eventually happens here is that they sent in a second team, this time with a little more heavy firepower, and they were able to kill this giant with a shot to the head with a 50 caliber rifle. And I don't know if you've ever seen anybody get shot with a 50 caliber rifle, but I have in Afghanistan. And when you shoot somebody with a 50 caliber, their body completely explodes like a grapefruit. Like it just explodes. And I hate to put the graphic image in your minds, but it's kind of necessary to make my point. Okay, if it will cause a human body to explode into pieces everywhere, then certainly it'll cause the head of a Nephilim to do the same thing, which is my point, which would be basically what we would call a decapitation and the only way to kill them. So it gives more merit to the story, and you can look the story up. They're trying their best to debunk this story, and especially the CIA agents and the other people that flew this giant out on a um on a crate attached to the bottom of a big helicopter. They flew it out. They give detailed information about all of this, which you can research. I would suggest DuckDuckGo because Google is full of fake check, full of Snopes lies, full of things trying to say this event wasn't real when the special forces troops that were there said it was. So they're trying to spread disinformation because they don't want the truth to get out. And why is that? Because if Nephilim are real, then it confirms the biblical account, the days of Noah, the giants, and it goes against evolution because these giants were smarter and more sophisticated in many ways than we are. So they don't want to debunk the theory that they brainwashed people with and spent billions of dollars indoctrinating our children in the school systems with and us today, evolution. So they will defend it at all cost and try to debunk anything that goes against it. Anyway, I hope this gives you food for thought. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Reality Check Radio and it makes you question whether immortals existed, whether immortals still walk the earth, and whether they will exist in the future through modern day technology. So I love you guys. Be safe and God bless.